Welcome back. Now, COVID-19 has had an impact globally, shutting down almost every type of business, school and religious institute. It's already claimed over 200,000 lives, has crippled many economies, and many have also had a lasting impact, or may have a lasting impact, on global politics. Some governments may use this opportunity to retain and expand emergency powers assumed during the pandemic. Corruption Watch's Executive Director, David Lewis, has his finger on that issue, joins us via Skype. David, good afternoon to you. And just generally, safe to say, I suppose, that governance and transparency have never been more critical. But an issue like COVID-19 does provide an opportunity for a degree of exploitation.
Yes, emergency powers have been extended. I mean, most pertinently for our purposes, to the police to enforce the lockdown or monitor the lockdown or police the lockdown, as well as to the procurement authorities who need to procure urgently, much more urgently, obviously, than they do under normal circumstances. And so the procurement regulations have been relaxed, probably appropriately, and the policing powers have been increased. I'm not so sure whether appropriately or not, but they have been nevertheless. And so, it's more difficult to be vigilant and to monitor procurement and policing practices in this period. But it's even more important that we do so, because if you understand corruption as an abuse of power, when additional powers are granted, the odds are that these will be more easily and readily abused than before. And we've seen that happening, certainly in the police space. The procurement space has been very, very difficult to monitor. We're trying to do that, and the regulations are uncertain, and transparency has not been great in that sphere. But it's necessary to be extremely vigilant.
To that end, as far as procurement is concerned, David Lewis, you've written, in fact, to the National Treasury. You've raised concerns about the possible looting of public funds. There is a deadline which we haven't reached just yet. But what particularly are you concerned about in that respect?
Well, our writing to the National Treasury is a particularly interesting case in point, because we wrote to the National Treasury on the basis of regulations that we thought were in place but had been superseded by other regulations that had not been published, to discover that those have been superseded by yet other regulations that have also still not been published. So, you need to know what the rules of the game in order to ensure that the rules are adhered to. And, basically, so for example, on the procurement front, emergency procurement regulations, which allow the procurer to bypass a whole lot of checks and balances, have been put in place, but only for particular products, only for products that are directly related to the COVID-19 process and issues. And it's very easy, because some of them are vague, to sneak in a whole lot of other procurement measures that should not be bypassing this into that process, for example. I mean, even in normal times, emergencies can be invoked for procurement when there is some urgency. And very often are, and they are always, almost inevitably, they are red flags for corruption. We now have an entire regime in which a large amount of government procurement is being subjected to what, previously was an exemption. And as I say, I can understand why, but it's all the more reason for government to be all the more transparent in doing what it's doing. That's what we're calling for. And, as I say, I think the South African government have been admirably transparent in their discussion of the progress of the virus and in us tackling it. They have been less so when it comes to procurement and when it comes to policing, and that's what we're really asking for.
So let me ask you this question then, David Lewis. If those rules, as you say, appear to be a moving target, what safeguards can be put in place, particularly during this time of emergency procurement? In other words, what sort of mechanism are you looking for from Treasury?
Well, firstly, certainty as to the rules. I mean, that's absolutely vital. And, as I illustrated earlier, there hasn't been that much certainty. But, for example, a daily government gazette could and should be produced detailing every act of emergency procurement that has been undertaken by government. That sounds like a difficult thing to do. It's not at all difficult. And that should be done, for example. There needs to be absolute certainty about what can be procured under emergency regulations and what can't be, and what is still subject to normal regulations. It's important to recognize, Jeremy, that we're unusual in that our Constitution provides for the sort of criteria that should govern public procurement. It must be fair, transparent, competitive, cost-effective, and those constitutional principles still apply. And those are the ones that we need to be able to monitor in order to ensure that procurement is following the rules and that the emergency powers are not abused.
You're raising red flags, and it's important that you do that. But is there any documented evidence of where the rules have been transgressed at this point?
Well, there have been a couple of anecdotal things in the media. I recall cases in the Eastern Cape. I'm not sure, and I think that one of the reasons why is because it is so difficult to monitor. Listen, I mean, we all know what a problem procurement has been around issues of corruption. And I see no reason why they should be less problematic in this period. In fact, if anything, they should be more problematic. I mean, the deal, though, is to treat transgressions with the utmost weight of the law. I think cutting corners or corrupting procurement processes under circumstances like this should be viewed as tantamount to profiteering during wartime. That's really what it is, and it should be treated with that level of seriousness.
David Lewis, I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much for joining us. He is the Executive Director. Thank you. The Executive Director of the organisation Corruption Watch. On to us via Skype.